Hello and welcome to the sewing studio. Today I'm going to show you how to make this lovely bunting which you can hang up in your sewing room because it looks like cotton reels, and this is made using up all your little scraps of fabric. It's also using up scraps of wadding as well that you don't know what to do with. So this is the perfect project for using up all your leftovers. So I'm going to show you how we do this. I'll just move this out of the way. So you can use the tiniest strips, and it doesn't matter if they've got like a wiggly edge or a straight edge, it doesn't matter. So you join up all your scraps until you've made a piece like this. So this piece measures 5 inches by 6 inches, and the 5 inches is across where the strips go. Now, if you've got stripy fabric, you can also make these cotton reels using your stripy fabric, but you have to make sure that your stripes go across the 5-inch width. So we would have a piece like that, and that's the 5 inches, that's the 6 inches there. So I'm going to show you how to do this. So you need 2 pieces of fabric, cotton reel colour, so these can be beige, grey, brown, whatever your choice is. And these pieces measure 8 inches by 3.5 inches. So I'm going to show you how we make this shape. So I measure in 1.5 inches from the end, and I put a little pencil mark, and I measure 1.5 inches again from the other end and make a little pencil mark. And then I draw a line from my pencil mark to the outer corner, so I'm on the diagonal. I'll just do this with a pencil. If you're brave, you could just go for it and cut it straight away, but I'm actually going to cut 2 pieces together. And when I'm doing this, I stack them and cut a lot. So that's why I put my pencil mark. So I'm going to put that one on top of there. And then I'm going to get my ruler again and my cutter. Now, when you're cutting a small piece like this on the diagonal, it's always good to put your ruler on the biggest piece of the fabric to make the cut, because if you put it on the smaller piece, sometimes it can move. So I'm just going to cut that on the diagonal, and then I'm going to do the same on the other corner. So again, I'm putting my ruler on the biggest piece of the fabric. And even then it's moved, because we're cutting corner to corner. So just be really careful. It seems to want to move, so just bear with me a moment. I'm going to twist it round, and I'm actually going to cut it with my other hand, and I'm going to go from the biggest piece at the bottom. That's not happened before, but that's typical. It's going to happen while I'm showing you. There we are. So I've cut that off. So that is now the top and bottom of my cotton reel. So if you were using your stripy fabric, you would just join those 2 pieces like that using a 1/4 inch seam. I'm going to join it to this stripy piece. So we're just going to go over to the machine now, and we're going to join those top and bottom. So I'm just going to join these 2 pieces, top and bottom, to our scrappy stripes, and I'm going to use a 1/4 inch seam. It doesn't really matter what the seam is at this point, because there isn't any matching, but this bit I'm doing at a 1/4 inch seam. Some of these under here, you can see I've done less than that. When I've only got a small piece of fabric, I've actually done probably 1/8, but none of it matters because it doesn't have to match up. So So now we're going to go back over to the iron, we're going to press that, and I'm going to show you how to put your wadding in. So I'm just going to press that back. And then the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use a scrap of wadding. So this is great for all those pieces that you've cut off a quilt or you've got a little bit left over when you've made a project. So I'm just going to put that on there, and I'm going to use some of the 505 temporary adhesive just to hold that on there whilst I put the back on. It would help if I could get the lid off. Right, and you always give this a good shake. And just a little bit of spray on my wadding. I'm being really careful not to get this on my board. Just hold this in place so I can then trim it up. And then with a bigger pair of scissors, I'm actually going to trim the wadding to the size of the cotton reel. And the good thing with this is when you want to use the piece for the back of the cotton reel, you can piece that, and I'll show you what I mean in a second, because you can just use up all of your scraps. So you need a piece of background fabric because we're going to sew this right sides together. I'm going to pop some pins in there in a moment. But what I was saying just now about using up scraps, so you could use this as your back because I've joined two pieces together, and on this occasion I've pressed my seam open. So I could also use that, and because the bunting is hung against the wall, you're not going to see the back, so you can use up all sorts of scraps. So for today, I'm going to use this piece. I'm going to pop some pins in to hold it before I cut it. And again, I'm just going to trim that round. And now we're going back to the sewing machine. I'm going to pop my walking foot on and we're going to stitch all the way round. So I've popped my walking foot on and I'm just going to go around the edge with about 1/4 inch seam. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave a gap at one end about that long, and that is so I can turn it through in a moment. And now I'm going to go back to the other table to show you how I trim off the corners and cut into these little places so it turns through and it gives us a really nice shape. So now I'm just going to trim off these corners, and the reason we do this is it gives us a better point when we turn it through. So we're getting rid of some of this bulk. So do that on all four corners, and then the other thing I do is where we're going to go in here, when the start of the cotton starts, I'm going to just nip in, being careful not to cut through my stitching. I have done that before and it's very frustrating because you have to redo it all. And then I'm going to turn it through, so I've left a gap here for turning. So I'm going to turn it all the way through. And then I want to poke out the corners. So I've got these little tweezers that I use for sewing. They're a good thing to have in your toolbox. And I'll just use the top part there because it's not too sharp. Because sometimes when you poke it through and you use a pencil or a pair of scissors, you end up poking through your stitching, whereas this is a nice shape. poke it through. And then I'm going to give it a good press in a moment. There we are. And when you're happy with your shape, give it a good press. And then you just close this gap up here, the gap that you've left for turning. And then you top stitch all the way round. And you can pop a pin in there to hold it. And then you would go back to your sewing machine and you would sew very, very near to the edge just to top stitch it. So if you look at one that I've made on the one that's already on the hanger, you can see here how close to the edge I've gone and how it's closed the gap. So you can't even see where the gap was. So that's your cotton reel finished. And then you can use these gorgeous little binding clips to hang it up on a piece of tape. Imagine if you had lots of Christmas scraps left over. You could make Christmas cotton reels to decorate your sewing room for Christmas as well. How gorgeous is that? Nothing's wasted, everything is used up. So as always, have fun. I look forward to seeing you next time here in the sewing studio.